now. Shall we
Yeah.
start things off?
Let's start at
Yeah,
6:30.
so I think the plan this evening is just to try and keep it as a bit of a conversational thing as we go, and not no particular presentation. I have a copy of my book with my tabs in, and we'll see how it all goes. So I guess just to do a little introduction, Caroline Eden's a writer focusing on Central Asia, the Caucasus and Eastern Europe. She contributes to various publications, including the Financial Times and the Guardian. Caroline's books have won the André Simon Food Book Award and the Guild of Food Writers Food Book Award and the Art of Eating Prize 2020, as well as being shortlisted for the Fortnum and Mason Awards. She lives in Edinburgh, Scotland. So she'll be telling us tonight about her most recent publication, Green Mountains, which is the final book in your colour trilogy, I believe it's called, following on from the multi-award-winning Black Sea and Red Sands in the same sort of region, wasn't it? Sort of a similar sort of travel and food books as well. Yeah. In that region. In Green Mountains, she reflects on 10 years of researching and writing these books, set most recently against the dark backdrop of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So,
thank you. Yes, thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming along this evening.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess maybe it would be good to start with a little bit of the origins of the trilogy as a whole, and to just set the scene for what this is.
It all sort of began in Ukraine, in Odessa, the great southern Ukrainian port city. I really fell in love with Odessa in about 2015, 2016. And around that time, I was working on a cookbook called Samarkand, which was about Central Asia and the Caucasus. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to do something that was more like a travel log with recipes, focusing on the Black Sea region? But I like to travel overland. So I thought what I would do would be to bookend it by starting in Odessa and ending in Trabzon. So sort of a relatively new city and a really ancient city. And then in the middle, Istanbul, which is not on the Black Sea, but is satisfyingly close and full of Black Sea folk, fishermen, cooks, taxi drivers, lots and lots of people from the Black Sea region, because the Black Sea region of Turkey, as I'm sure some of you know, is vast. It comes right inland as well. So that was the Black Sea book, and it came out in 2018, and it sort of weaved in a lot of really interesting stories, I think, about Bulgaria, Romania, that huge coastline of Turkey, Bessarabia, and Odessa. So that was that book. In 2020, I brought out a book called Red Sands, which is all about Central Asia. The 4 stands, but not Turkmenistan, the 5th, because I can't get a visa. So that book, similar vein, a travel log with recipes punctuated through, which I call my edible postcards, because obviously I'm not from these countries, so they're my interpretations. They're just a sort of way of me sending the reader something else, a sort of 3-dimensional way of tasting the journey. I really loved the Red Sands book. It was a lot of work. It's called Red Sands, by the way, because in the Turkic languages, Kizilkum, Red Sands. It's the desert that spans Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So that came out in the middle of the pandemic, which was a bit of a shame, and I didn't do any in-person events, but it still sold okay, and it's there. It's the second one in the trilogy. This one took 5 years because of, well, lots of things of which I'm sure you'll understand. So I thought I wanted to do the trilogy. It was really obvious to me that the third book had to be on the Caucasus, the lands in between the Black Sea and the Caspian. So Red Sands has started in the Caspian, around the Caspian, sorry, in Kazakhstan. So I thought the lands in between, that makes good sense. However, around this time, Russia was sort of, it looked like Russia was going to invade Ukraine fully. And on top of that, things were starting to happen with Nagorno-Karabakh around this time of research as well. And there was, of course, the pandemic too. So all of those things combined, I ended up with a slightly different book. I had initially thought about including Azerbaijan because I have been there several times and I very much enjoyed the food and meeting the people there. However, I didn't feel it was appropriate for this book to have Armenia and Azerbaijan in the same book at the moment. So, and I'm glad I made that decision because obviously Nagorno-Karabakh is now lost, so to Armenia. This book begins in southern Armenia, in the Vayat Zor region, one very, very hot summer, and it sort of moves up. I did it over a couple of years. It moves up to northern Georgia and it ends back on the Black Sea where the trilogy began. There is the backdrop of Ukraine throughout, because obviously whatever's happening there is impacting the entire region, including Central Asia. So I also reference that in the book and talk about how, you know, the capital cities of Yerevan and Tbilisi are now dealing with huge numbers of young Russians, and some not so young Russians, but Russians arriving in vast numbers and changing these places. Even cities like Gyumri, you know, Armenia's second city, has obviously been impacted by all this. So geopolitics always have played a part in my books, because it's just because you're writing about food doesn't mean you can ignore these things. It's important to bring them in because it's affecting people's lives hugely. You know, I have a recipe in this book for Jingalov hats, which is obviously a recipe that the Armenians told me is from Nagorno-Karabakh. So that's referenced in there. And so that's the trilogy. It is a travel book with recipes. It's quite a meandering book. I've got city walks in here. I've also got some longer walks, some river walks, long and short. Some of them are quite adventurous, some not so much. But I did different seasons as well to see the differences. So I returned.
And I noticed that for Georgia, that some of it was talking about Georgia in the summer, but most of it was Georgia in the winter.
Yes.
And then Armenia, it sounded like you'd hit it in the middle of August, which everyone says is a dangerous time to be.
I was certainly there in the summer. I had a 2-month trip through Armenia, and it was the summertime, and for me it was incredibly hot. But it didn't matter too much. It was still absolutely wonderful to be there.
Would you plan it differently?
I think I'd maybe go in the spring or the autumn, but it sometimes depends on events. So the person I was traveling with is a news journalist. So he had a reason. I can't remember what it was. It was something to do with Pashinyan at that time, and that's why we went when we went. So it's kind of tied in around that.
And were you trying to follow a particular route? I think the book seems to start sort of in the south of Armenia and make its way up. But were you actually following a route like that? Or
not really. I mean, I was using various different ways to try and, you know, plan the walks, and I was using 2 main sources: the wonderful Hike Armenia app, which is very, very useful, and obviously parts of the Transcaucasian Trail, sections of that as well. So it sort of depended on which walks looked suitable and would be interesting, perhaps would provide a story or two and would be doable. So often we would drive the rented Lada car we had to a trailhead and then walk. So obviously I didn't walk the entire way. Also, as a woman and somebody who doesn't speak Armenian, it was important for me to be walking with somebody most of the time. So you're also sort of steered by that, you know, who you can take with you on your walk.
And I got the impression you got by on Russian a little bit.
A little bit.
Is that you?
Yes. Yeah. So me and the person I was traveling with, he's very fluent in Russian. I speak some Russian. So.
Yeah. So and that got you by in both Armenia and Georgia.
Yes. I mean, a lot of people speak English.
Yeah.
So
I've heard there is more of that now.
Certainly with younger people, obviously, but with older people, it's useful.
And you said you worked. It was about 2 years you were doing it. Was there how did you go about planning where you were going to go and that sort of thing?
Well, it was quite bitty because I had actually hoped to go to Dagestan. I wanted to include Dagestan in a book on the Caucasus as well, because the food culture there is incredibly interesting. But with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, obviously I couldn't. So it was really a case of, again, when my friends, I've got quite a lot of expat Western friends in Tbilisi. So for the Georgian section of the book, I'd make sure I was visiting when they were available and I could walk with them and take them on my travels.
And you mentioned partly the Transcaucasian Trail. I think you weren't actually trying to follow that at all. Just
3,000 kilometers
section.
Yeah. So it's wonderful what they've done. It's in all three of the countries of the South Caucasus, including Azerbaijan. It's becoming increasingly difficult for them to operate with what's happening in Georgia at the moment, unfortunately. But they've done incredible work. And a lot of the places I visited up on the Trans-Caucasian Trail map. So I hope it inspires some people to go.
And is that sort of generally a good approach if someone wanted to?
I mean, it's quite
walking
wild, I have to say. I mean, the first walk I did in the book, in the Vidzor region, very close to a tiny village called Gomp, of a town of about 300 people. We headed off, and it was a sort of 5 or 6 hour walk, and it was incredibly hot, and there's this fantastic lightning storm by the time we hit the top of the plateau. And you've got to be fit, and you've got to be able to follow a trail, like read a map, and carry 3 or 4 liters of water and that sort of thing. So I am a hill walker. I live in Scotland, so I go out most weeks hill walking. But obviously, this is an entirely different terrain. And it did occur to me that if we had have been hit by the lightning, a shepherd would have eventually found us, but I'm not sure when, because it was very remote. And it's utterly beautiful, blue poppies and red poppies growing. And Mary at the guest house has sent us off with a wonderful packed lunch. But it's trekking in the Caucasus is certainly, I wouldn't want to use the word dangerous, but it's challenging. Sometimes the trails get overgrown. There's giant hogweed growing, which obviously blisters your skin if you get near to it. And the shepherd dogs, I'm a huge dog person, but I didn't have any problems with those, but they could be a problem.
Are the trails cleared for people to walk on, or
not always? I mean, they try, and they obviously,
there's a route you should follow, but
there's a route you should follow, but sometimes it gets overgrown, like with any trail, and they can't have people clearing trails constantly. They do have people doing that, clearing the trails, but it's sort of up to you to sometimes get through it.
No, I guess it did set the scene that that the lightning storm is pretty much the first walk you were doing in the book. I don't know whether it was early on in your actual
it was the
trip.
It was the first walk.
First trip
Yeah. So the lovely thing about the walk is so it's the first long walk we did, and we came down from this plateau. We saw the larder car, we got back in it, we drove to a gas station and stopped, filled up the car, and as James got out to pay for the petrol, this Armenian man came over in his overalls and handed me 4 apricots through the car window. And it was honestly, it was like a blessing. And so I said in the book, when an Armenian hands you an apricot, they're handing you Armenia, because it felt like a very sort of poignant thing. And of course, then we got handed apricots everywhere we went. But they were like little medals. I put them on the dashboard. And of course, a lot of you here will know that the apricot is so integral to Armenian culture. It's the color in the flag. The duduk instrument is carved from the apricot wood. It's on beautiful postage stamps. It's intrinsic. So I think that theme then began running through the book of the apricots.
You certainly seem sort of going through at least the Armenian part. I don't know so much about Georgia, but at least going through the Armenian part of it, you seem to cover quite a lot of the culture, and as well as the country and the food, and it just the names, whether it's composers or filmmakers like Parajanov and artists. You seem to cover quite a good breadth of, well, at least the things that Armenians know Armenia for, and I think many of the things that are known outside as well. It seems to be, we're trying to give a flavor for the whole country in that way.
Certainly, because I think travel writing is like that. You can choose to write about anything. You might choose to write about architecture or archaeology. I really love film and music and art, so obviously it was wonderful to go to Armenia and to see and to be in Armenia and to visit the House Museum of Sarian, for example, and Parajanov's House Museum in Yerevan and Hachachurian, and to see these things in real life. And I think there's a frustration that not to compare, but Georgia has got a very effective tourism board. And I think a lot of people are quite aware nowadays, at least about, the wonders of Kinkali and Hachapuri and things. But culturally, Armenia is so rich. I think it was a real pleasure for me to include some of the artists. And of course, food features in a lot of this cultural work. The color of pomegranate, Sarian, often painted still lifes of wonderful flowers and fruits from Armenia. So I think it's always possible to weave these things in. And people really love that sort of broad portrait of a country. It gives an idea of what you'll get if you set off to visit.
And I thought was it a Lada Niva or just a Lada? It sort of seems to be the classic car of Armenia.
Well, it is.
Has a
I mean,
reputation. Was it a deliberate choice to rent one?
I mean, it was a mixed blessing. It was white, like little boxy. It was a Lada Niva, and obviously we broke down at some point because it overheated all the time. And one point it overheated, and these two men stopped, and they got in, and eventually they got it going again. And that was because everyone, like so many men in Armenia, know how to fix a Lada. So if we'd have been in a different car, I'm not sure we'd have been as lucky. So it was actually great having this car, but it would keep overheating. But it was, it's a very nice little car to move around in.
It seems to have got you everywhere, at least.
More or less.
And I mean, speaking of some of the dangers, there seem to be a few mentions of vipers and scorpions as well. Is that something you actually came across,
No,
or just something you'd been warned about?
But we were warned. We were warned about snakes in the summertime. But there's an essay in the book where I have dinner with my friend Luba and a priest who was once at Noravank, and he said that in the springtime there really are a lot of snakes. I was there in the height of summer, so I didn't see them, but I was still tapping the walking sticks just in case they were in the bushes, because of course if they hear you coming, they get out the way.
I don't know. Do
Have you have you seen them?
I haven't. No, I've not been there, to be honest. But,
I mean,
I don't know. I'm curious how effective that is.
There are a lot of signs around monasteries that says in English, "Be careful, snakes." So I mean, they are there.
Yeah, I was curious actually. Was the conversation with Father Maturasian before or after you went to Noravank?
Ooh.
I was just curious whether you were going. Did you go there with the knowledge that he'd given you, or?
I think it was afterwards. But he was just remarkable. He was a photographer as well, so he'd had an exhibition in California somewhere of his amazing monastery portraits of Noravank through the seasons and the bears that live in the honeycomb caverns around the valley. And he was just absolutely fascinating. And we had a lovely dinner, drinking compote under a mulberry tree in Yerevan and him telling us his tales. I think that was the same day we visited the chess house, which I also completely fell in love with. Such an interesting building, and also when you go in, it's just all the rugs and the work. It's just the most fantastic building.
Sounded like you got a good little introduction to the place, a bit of a tour.
Yes, we had a tour, and the man who was running it, I said to him, what's the key? Because obviously Armenia's got such a great reputation for chess players. And the children were practicing downstairs when we were there. So they were all like, they looked so young to me, like sort of between 7 and 10, full of children playing chess. And I said to the guy running it, who was a very, very good chess player, what's the key with chess? And he said, to eat a good meal and to sort of pace yourself, because it's like sport. And of course, we don't think of it like sport. We think of it as just a cerebral thing, but he said it is like a sport. But yeah, really incredible building. I mean, I'd say if anyone's got plans to go and they haven't been, you should try and go in and have a look, because it's amazing.
Yeah, it sounded like you did manage to get around Yerevan quite a bit.
Had a lot of time in Yerevan. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was such an interesting city. I wrote a piece for the FT about walking around the city, because even though it's hot, I do love to walk, and I think only really by walking can you get a sense of a place. And I loved all the drinking fountains everywhere, the pulpalact. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but this is such a good idea. It's something we've lost in the UK. We used to have, like, it was quite a Victorian thing to have drinking fountains for people. And nowadays, of course, people are less willing to put investment into things that don't make money. But it's a generous thing to have water fountains that people can stop and drink from. And they're very artistically done in Yerevan. There's one, I can't remember the name, but it's got 7 drinking bowls and it's like a piece of art. It was near Taras Shevchenko Street, I think.
Sure.
Obviously,
Someone here probably knows
Ukrainian poets.
Yeah. Yeah, it did sound like you managed to get around there. I think it was a bit of an interesting contrast in Georgia because that seemed very much focused on getting out of the city and into the mountains.
Well, I mean, the thing was, I've been to Tbilisi many times and I was trying to, it's become quite touristy, Tbilisi, especially like in the old, right in the center. So I stayed out slightly outside the centre by the Deserters Bazaar by the railway station. And I thought for that chapter, I would just do a mile radius, like a ring around where I happened to be staying and just talk about what was around that rather than trying to talk about, because Tbilisi also is a very ancient city. So that was how, there's many different ways to write about urban walking, but I think if you do a radial sort of a round ring, that can work quite well.
Did you actually travel from one country to the other, or were they separate trips that you would
Yeah,
make?
they were separate trips.
Oh, okay. So how did you approach traveling in Georgia and planning that side of things?
In various ways. I mean, sometimes I would take my Struker. We also rented a car. Once I hired a driver to take us up to Svaneti in the winter, Dimitri, who put 5 liters of his family wine in the boot before we set off on the 9-hour drive. And that was purely because the driving in Georgia is quite aggressive on the mountain roads, and I wanted a local driver in our own car so we could stop on the way. And that worked out really well. Svaneti in the winter is absolutely magical in northern Georgia.
What is it about Svaneti?
Well, we went up for the Lamproba festival, which is a pagan festival, and it's happens around Valentine's Day. And it's when the Svan people who live in Svaneti, slightly different culture to the rest of Georgia, different language, they remember their dead. So they burn birch branches and they put them by the graves one night and they gather around drinking char and wine and eating the kubdari meat hachapuri pies. And it's really, really an amazing thing to witness. It was -20 and deep, deep, deep snow. I mean, it was absolutely freezing. But we spent an evening walking around and talking to people with Dimitri, Amelia, my friend, and I. And it was just wonderful, actually. I remember there was one scene where about 20 men who were all about sort of 40 or 50 had gathered around one particular grave. And it was a friend of theirs who died in a car accident. And every year they gather there and they talk about their lives and what they're up to, and they drink the cha-cha and the wine. And I just thought that's so touching. It's a bit like, I guess it's a bit like people gathering in a pub here, but to remember, I thought that was very nice. So that was wonderful. And it's just unbelievably beautiful up there. Everything was the color of toothpaste. I just remember thinking it's like the water was like mint blue and then the snow was so thick. All the young, cool Tbilisins were going up there for skiing, but we just did a little bit of trekking and went for this festival really to see that.
That was winter though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Were you able to do much hiking? And
we did
I
one.
would have thought it would be fairly tough conditions.
It was. I mean, we had like, what do you call it, where you strap the we had some gear, so we went, but not far. To see some churches, and we sort of walked and we could see Mount Ushba just shining. The mountains were resplendent, and yeah, we did what we could.
Yeah, I noticed you did manage. So back to Armenia, you were sort of talking about the cemeteries there, but you sort of managed to find the sort of field of Kashgar. It's sort of near the writer's house.
Norotus, yes. Yeah, that was incredible. It amazes me with the Kashgars how old they are, obviously, and how they're just scattered. I remember being in Lviv actually just before the full-scale invasion, and there's a wonderful Armenian cathedral there, and incredible murals inside, painted in gold of sheep and saints, and outside they have a Kachkar. And I suppose wherever Armenians are, you might find a Kachkar, but the ones in Noritus are obviously 1,000 years old, some of them. I mean, they're completely ancient. And I suppose the thing that I remember, there's a soundtrack to the Armenia trip, and it was Charles Aznavour. And when I came out of Noritus, there was this beautiful mural of him, and he's really distinctive looking. And I remember seeing that, and I just remember thinking, no, people don't know that he was, Armenian heritage, Armenian parents. The Frank Sinatra of France.
When I was younger, I just knew of him as a French singer.
Yeah, but he was, I mean, if you look at him and you listen to him, I mean, he's like, he's obviously Armenian.
Yeah.
So I really fell in love with him, actually. I mean, obviously we all know him, but being in Armenia just sort of placed him.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned hearing it in the street.
In the cafes.
The cafes and
Les Comédiennes, like everywhere. Yeah, it's lovely.
I'm not sure I would have recognized the names of the songs, and I recognize his voice, I think. So, yeah. So, I mean, are there any sections that you wanted to read from? I was just wondering if you've
I can do
a bit.
It's kind of, I mean, we might go with right at the beginning, perhaps. So the walk I was describing to you with the Armenian gas station worker handing me the apricots very kindly through the window. A sign or token, a trophy or edible medal, I wondered silently, because that same afternoon, my husband James and I thought that we were going to die out there, somewhere on a sizzlingly hot, frighteningly remote mountain plateau in southeastern Armenia, in the province of Viat Zor, also known as the Valley of Woes, because of the countless calamitous earthquakes that have shaken its canyons. Armenia, sitting where the Arabian tectonic plate grinds against the Eurasian one, is prone to convulsions. The country has been torn apart by seismic waves many times, the worst in recent history being the 1988 Spitak earthquake, which shattered the northwest, killing tens of thousands. While it wasn't a tremor that had made me shake with fear, it was something born of nature, less dramatic, but just as capable of killing should you be in the wrong place when it randomly hits. Smiling, the stranger walked away, returning to his petrol pump on the side of the road, busy with trucks spinning up dust. I watched him go, his hands now empty and tucked into the pockets of his overalls. Putting the apricots in a neat row on the dashboard, my chest and clothes still wet with sweat, I wanted to preserve them there and then as a memento of my near-death experience. I sat completely still, relishing the calm as James paid for petrol. Across the street, Armenia's wine sat warming up to the temperature of hot tea in plastic Coca-Cola bottles to be picked up by Iranian truckers who bought it disguised to carry home to Iran, where alcohol is banned, but the market for illegal wine is thriving. I pictured the Silk Road city of Tabriz across the Armenian-Iranian border, just a few hours' drive away, with its bazaars of coppersmiths and carpets. Matching the rose-pink desert sand colour of the sunset painting the valley, the apricots wobbled and rocked gently as we drove off. I stared at them, feeling numb, the very last of the adrenaline draining away. And then I described the walk in detail. But it was such a curious thing, this storm. It's just came out of nowhere. We could hear this thunder, and then suddenly these lightning forks came down about 20 meters away. I mean, very, very close. And I'd never been in a lightning storm before. So we knew we should get on the ground, but I didn't know then that you should actually go in a tight ball, as tight as possible. So we chucked the trekking poles. And as I laid on the ground, a mouse ran past me, which, I mean, I just thought, it was like nature went weird just for that moment. It was very, very intense. But of course, because it was Armenia, this wonderful relief came afterwards. We went back to the guest house, this lovely guest house in, forgive my pronunciation, Yeghegnadzador, the town. Greenstone guest house there. There's a wonderful woman called Mary cooking in the kitchen, and she made us this beautiful soup with bulgur wheat and fresh garden herbs. We had the wonderful Iranian Noir wine, the red wine of the region, and obviously some Ararat brandy, and relaxed. And then the sort of journey began in earnest. But it was just a sort of very intense way for it to begin. That's the recipe there. Yeah.
It did look rather nice.
It was very good.
I was hoping to try and make it before today, but I didn't quite.
We also had a rishta, obviously the pasta with just some butter, which was very nice as well.
It was sort of an interesting contrast between the two. How did you find the sort of contrast in foods between Armenia and Georgia? Because I noticed, at least in terms of the recipes you have in here, the Armenian ones are very much about herbs and stuff, fresh greens, things like that. On the Georgian side of it, you did quite a lot of quite hearty soups and that sort of thing, and stuff. I think it was a sort of squash, pumpkin soup and coriander soup and things like that. So what did you notice in terms of the differences between them?
I mean, they are quite different. I think there are similarities. Wonderful fruit, vegetables, and herbs in both countries. Wonderful appreciation of dairy and bread. Obviously, lavash is the backbone of Armenian cookery, and it's the most incredible thing to eat it freshly blistered and warm. I think it's the herbs that really strike me with both of the cuisines, this sort of really liberal use of delicious fresh herbs. And the fact that sometimes you'll be in a restaurant and a plate will arrive just with herbs on it for you to do what you might like with it. And I really loved the tarragon in both countries, the liberal use of tarragon, which is my favorite herb. And we're very, very nervous of it here in the UK. And we use just like a pinch or a sprinkle. But the lovely thing, one of the first things I ate in Armenia was just an omelette for breakfast with really nice cheese inside and these sort of blades of tarragon. And I just thought, this is really interesting because I've not really seen that before. And I suppose the other difference is in Armenia, I think because of the diaspora, you've got much more of a Middle Eastern restaurant scene happening with a lot of the Syrians and the Lebanese moving back. And then obviously the wider historical links with Turkey and also in Iran. So it's a sort of much more, I think it's broader. And I think Georgia's Georgian. And in Georgia, it's a lot of, the wonderful kinkalis and the wonderful soups and the wonderful spice mixes. So the svan salt you get up in Svaneti, which is a mixture of 7 different things. And it's very pungent. And the kaneli semeli and the sort of these spice mixes. I mean, I'm not an expert. This is why I call them edible postcards. They're just my interpretations. I'm not Armenian or Georgian, obviously. So I can't claim any form of expertise. I'm just an enthusiast. But the food is wonderful in both countries. I mean, you just eat so well. And I suppose the idea with the book, the reason I wanted to do walking is because as an outsider, I think when people come back from the South Caucasus, they talk about 3 things: the hospitality, the walking, and the food. And so I thought it kind of makes sense to me to do a walking book with recipes, because nothing in the world tastes better than a meal after a long walk. Like whatever you have, whether it's a cheese sandwich in Scotland or it's like a 3-course Armenian meal, it's wonderful because you've earned it. And the beauty in these 2 countries is it will be served with care and attention and probably with some very good wine and fresh bread. I mean, it's wonderful to walk in the Caucasus and then be fed afterwards.
How did you approach translating it for, I guess, more or less a British sort of supermarket availability?
It's not difficult. I mean, the only thing, some of the Georgian spices are a little bit more tricky to find. Svan salt, I don't think you can find in the UK. Correct me if anyone's found it. I've not really looked. I brought a load back with me. It lasts forever because you only need a tiny amount. Blue fenugreek, which the Georgians use, you can find. Spice Mountain and Borough Market, for example, stocks it. I don't live in London. I mean, in Edinburgh, we're certainly not going to find much of this, but online, people sell lots of things nowadays, so you might be able to find a Svan salt, even.
I didn't notice. What did you put in your recipes? Did you use the
Well, I
spices
used
in
what I brought
in the
back.
recipes
So
in the book?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But then I would also break down the 7 ingredients. So if somebody wanted to make their own spice mix, that they can.
Yeah. So I noticed, at least, for example, with the jingle off hats, you provide I guess it's sort of a simplified version of it, because you hear about so many different herbs.
All the herbs
going
and some of the
into it
greens, some of them
traditionally.
are unnamed. I mean, it's such an amazing variety of greens and herbs. I mean, my friend and I were walking in northern Georgia and we were treading on this herb as we were just walking. And it was definitely like a cousin of mint, we called it, because we were like, it's mint, but we weren't sure exactly what mint it was. And I think that a lot of, the wild variety of herbs is just incredible.
You mentioned you used there was a book, Lavash. They did the book launch with us. I think it was back in 2020.
Kate Leahy's book, yeah, it's great.
Did a session with them, and I think we did some cooking with them, I think, if I remember right, which was good fun. But so you mentioned you used that as a bit of inspiration for some of the things you wanted to find when you were in Armenia.
Well, I used their recipe to help me with the jingle off hats recipe in the book. So obviously,
they do break it down in terms of trying to
I couldn't
find
do
the right mix of
I couldn't do a better job. So I think mine is a simpler version, but it's definitely inspired by their recipe.
And do you enjoy it? It's maybe not quite what you had in Armenia, but
I mean, I've not been to Nagorno-Karabakh and I probably won't go now. So I ate jingle off hats in Yerevan in a really nice small tavern. And the thing that struck me about it was it's a very simple thing, really. It's just a flatbread stuffed with greens, which sounds like it's going to be quite tasteless, but it isn't. It's something about the way it's cooked, and maybe I think there's some butter often, but it's the 3 pots of, I remember there was cumin, salt, and paprika, I think, or chili on the table. And so you sort of season it yourself, which was really interesting way of doing things, I thought. But it's a stuffed bread with great meaning, obviously, that carries weight in Armenia. So I think sometimes a dish is more, it's more about the historical context of it. So it was lovely to eat it there in Armenia.
And for anyone trying recipes from here, are there any, maybe one from each of Georgia and Armenia that you think sort of brings back the memories the most?
There's a few. I mean, one of the things I loved discovering in Yerevan, I have to say, it was in the Tafunkian Hotel. They've got a very good restaurant that was really well air conditioned, and I sat there once, having been around the market, and I said, just need to sit in the air conditioning and have a bottle of Jermuk, and then looked at the menu, which is Jermuk's the wonderful mineral water. And they had something called etch. How do I pronounce it? Each. And I was like, this is interesting. It's like bulgur wheat, but it's not, because it's bulgur which has been infused with tomato juice. So it's quite, sorry, not a nice word, wet bulgur. Comes in like a dome, and then they've put fresh chopped salad on the top with like parsley, tomatoes, spring onions, cucumbers. This is the most refreshing, delicious thing. And I thought it's so simple in a way, but like it's super delicious. And so I'd never heard of it. It was entirely new to me. And of course, this is what happens when you travel with an eye to the culinary world. You're constantly thinking, this is a bit like that, but it's different. And it reminds me of this, but it's not. And I loved that. It's just a great, simple dish.
It does sound a simple one to make.
Yeah. And I have to say, in Georgia, the surprise was in Batumi, the city on the Black Sea, the sort of second city. Has anyone been to Batumi? Okay. I like Batumi very much. It's a kind of curious city, a lot of unusual architecture. I had an amazing dish there one afternoon for lunch, lobio croquettes. Lobio just means beans. It was kidney beans, and they'd rolled them in breadcrumbs to make the croquettes, and then they'd serve them on this sort of very sharp tomato sauce, and had put some watercress and pickled pink onions on the top. This was totally delicious. And I ate it, and I thought I must, because I can recreate that relatively simply. Include that in the book as well, so that's also in there.
Okay. Very nice.
Yeah, I think it's simple again, but it's unusual.
How much sort of editing down? I think you didn't have Kinkali in there, did you?
I
I think
think
there's
it's
Khachapuri, isn't there?
yeah,
So,
there's a Guri and Hachapuri in there. A lot of my food writing colleagues have written great recipes for Kinkali and Hachapuri, and there's lots online. So I wanted to do things that were perhaps less known. When I was in Guria, which is a lovely part of Georgia, close to the Black Sea, wine producing region, I had the most amazing Gurian hachapuri, which I'd never tried on any previous visits before. And that type of hachapuri, it's closed, the bread, and then when you cut into it, it's got boiled eggs in it. So it's very, very nice for breakfast. And within the boiled eggs, or around the boiled eggs, there's this amazing hot souffle cheese, which was just, I mean, it was just totally divine, this Gurian hachapuri. It was the best hachapuri I'd ever had. So I can't eat that much hachapuri. This is the other thing. It's like people go to Georgia and they come back talking about all this hachapuri they've eaten. And I just think it's very rich. So the bean-filled bread I tend to eat a lot of, but this Gurian hachapuri was special.
Just wrap up there. Everyone here, we've got some drinks and nibbles to just ask a few questions, and Caroline's brought some books that she'll be selling this evening. I want to say thank you to everyone who has donated as well to the Armenian Institute, and we appreciate donations if anyone's thinking of it. And before we finish, just to mention, we have a few more events before we tend to take a bit of a summer break. So we have another recipes one, how recipes make our histories. That's on the 9th of June. We have a family history writing workshop on the 12th of June. I went to the last one. It was really very interesting and quite a mix of people and some very interesting backgrounds there. Anyone who's in London, the Armenian Summer Festival will be there on the 15th of June. That's always a fun event. Lots of stalls, lots of music, everyone from the community getting together. We have one called Where Is Me, or ME, locating Armenia in the Middle East on the 18th, and a Golden Age exploring 10 years of queer Armenian writing on the 26th of June. So, yeah, please come along to some of those. Well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming.